It's speculation season, y'all. This is an unresolved case that dates all the way back to the 70s. 1978, to be specific. This one's about two siblings named Scott and Amy Fandel. Scott was 13 years old, Amy was 8, and their parents, Roger and Margaret, had recently gone through a really rough divorce. And Roger loved his kids, but he was a cheater. Margaret worked long hours as a waitress, and when she learned that Roger had been playing her, she started to rely on alcohol to cope. And the marriage all just fell apart, and they ended up getting divorced. And Roger moved to Arizona. He left her and the kids and moved to Arizona. And this, by the way, this was in Alaska. So he went quite a ways. A little bit of a climate change for Roger. So the kids stayed with their mom. They're in a place called Sterling, Alaska. And they live in this little cabin. It's in the woods. It's tucked back. The mom, Margaret, she's trying to provide for her kids. She has to work, and she's probably depressed because she had to go through this divorce and things have changed, and she's just trying to cope, right? And so these kids got left unattended most of the time. On the night of September 5th of 1978, the kids went with their mom and their Aunt Kathy, who was visiting, to this restaurant/bar called Good Time Charlie's. And I read somewhere that Good Time Charlie's was actually a strip club. But apparently there's like one day a week that they did kind of like this live music potluck type situation. And so I guess that's what that was. So they all stayed till about 10. And Margaret and Kathy are like, these kids need to go home. Okay, it is mama's turn to have a little fun. So they take the kids back home. They drop them off, and they're like, don't stay up too late. And they walk out the door and they go back to Good Time Charlie's to get theirs. Shake their little money makers. The lock on the cabin's front door was broken, but it wasn't a concern to Margaret because it was tucked back in the woods away from the road. It wasn't a big deal. It hadn't been a big deal. And so whatever, no broken lock is going to stop Marge from getting hers. So Amy and Scott are home alone, and it's got to be like 11 at night at this point. And they decide that now would be a good time to go next door to the Lupton house and see if the Lupton kids can play and hang out. And so they go in. I guess the mom was like, sure, come on in. So they go in and they're hanging out, and after like an hour maybe, Mrs. Lupton kicked him out, gave him the boot. She's like, hey, you kids, get out of here, you're being too loud. Which I get, like, Mrs. Lupton, I see you. Back at the bar, Margaret and Kathy are having a great time. And they decide to head home after a few hours, and they get back about 2 or 3 in the morning. And there were a couple of things when they walked in that seemed a little bit unusual. Her kids, Margaret's kids, were really, really afraid of the dark. Both of them, Scott and Amy. And so they for sure would leave the cabin lights on, but all of them were off. And she's like, that's strange. And then they walk into the kitchen and they find a pot of boiling water with a box of mac and cheese and an open can of tomatoes. What were they going to do with those tomatoes? I see why this was odd. Apparently this was something the kids like to eat. And so Margaret just figured that they started making it and they forgot about it and went to bed and just left it there. With that, Margaret decided it was time for bed because she had to be up at 8:30 to go to work tomorrow. So she climbs into bed. She gets a few hours of sleep, and when she got up and got ready to go to work, the house was quiet, but, the kids were at school. They got themselves ready. They got themselves to school for sure. That's where they were. It was not a concern to Margaret. So Margaret heads to work, and at some point in the day, she needs to relay a message to Amy right now. So she calls the school, and she's like, hey, can you tell Amy blah, 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 blah. And they're like, Amy's not here. And Margaret's like, what? And so she's like, I need to leave work. I got to get this sorted out. And her boss is like, he wouldn't let her. And so she's like, okay, I guess I'm staying at work and my kids are missing. Please, I would run through fire for my kids. And Kathy woke up around noon, and obviously the kids were gone. She assumed that they were at school. Margaret was at work. And when the bus came to drop off the kids, they were not in the crowd of kids who got off at that bus station. There was no sign of Amy or Scott. And initially, Kathy didn't really think too much about this because she just assumed that they went over to the Luptons to hang out with the Lupton kids. And it wasn't until the Lupton kids came over to knock on the door to see if Amy and Scott could play that Kathy got worried. And so she called Margaret, who was still at work, to tell her, like, hey, where are the kids? I don't have them. They didn't get off the bus. They're not over at the Luptons. Do you know where they are? And Margaret is freaked out now. And so she immediately calls the police. And police come out. They search the area. Roger even flew out from Arizona to assist them in finding the kids, but there was no trace of them. So obviously the theory here is that the kids were abducted, but by who? Who would have taken them? And Margaret's suspicion was that it was her ex-husband, Roger, that he took the kids back to Arizona. And when she tried to call him to ask him about this, she couldn't get through to him. So she contacted his family, and they're like, nobody, like, we don't have them. Nobody here in Arizona has them. And despite this, Roger did remain a suspect for years, but the police never found any evidence that the kids were with him, and so he kind of fell off the suspect list. And this is like almost 50 years ago. In the years after the disappearance, Margaret moved to Illinois, and their cabin, I don't know what happened, but it ended up burning down. And so those kids couldn't even come home if they wanted to because it's not there anymore. It has been, like almost 46 years. And Margaret has clung to her belief that Roger took them. And of course, there are theories surrounding this. Another theory is that because it was a small town, maybe somebody heard Margaret talking. You know, everybody knows each other in a small town. So maybe somebody heard Margaret talking about how the kids were home alone that night. Or maybe somebody knew that she was an alcoholic and figured, oh, it's Sunday or whatever. She's going to be at the bar tonight. And then I can go take the kids. I mean, the lock on the freaking cabin was broken. Lock your doors. Lock your doors. I don't know why people... Like, if your doorknob is broken, replace it. Don't take risks like that. I don't get it. Anyway, so some people think that Margaret acted a little bit off about the whole thing, and I have to agree. I feel like if your kids are missing, you're going to say, screw your job, screw my job. I don't care if you fire me. I'm leaving because my daughter's not at school, you know? But this could be because clearly she's a neglectful parent. She's an alcoholic. She's probably dealing with mental health stuff that was brought on just by life's circumstances and her situation. Maybe that's why. Or did she have something to do with it? I mean, I don't know. And something to note, okay? I don't think this really went anywhere, but Roger had a girlfriend in 1978 when this all happened. And allegedly, she asked Roger's uncle for $5,000 in exchange for info about where the kids were and what happened to them. It's anybody's guess at this point. If the kids are still alive miraculously somehow, they'd be in their 50s now, but I don't know. It's awful. It's so sad. What are your theories? Let me know what your theories are in the comments. Let's chat. Let's chat about this. Take care of yourself, and I will see you next time.